All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. We are here celebrating the release birthday, right? It's Tuesday,
Yeah.
of D.P. Lyle's prior bad acts. Um, he is the Macavity Award winning and Edgar Award nominated author of many fiction and nonfiction books, forensics expert, worked on television shows, CSI, Law and Order, and you hang out on radio and TV shows, um, and author of the Jake Longley novels. And this is the second in the series, if I'm not wrong, correct?
Correct.
Right. It's the second in the Kane Harper thriller series. We're really glad to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I'm going to let you take over. But before I do that, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and drop those in the Ask a Question tab at the bottom. And if you're interested in getting some personalized book plates or signed book plates, you can hit the order personalized book plates tab below. And otherwise, I'm going to hand it off to you, Doug, and
All
let
right.
you go.
Cool. Well, thanks very much, Matt. I appreciate it. And thanks to Mysterious Galaxy for inviting me to do this. And I hope all of you out there are having a good day and, you're not going completely crazy being in lockdown. Seems like it's been going on for like a decade now. This is Prior Bad Acts is the second book. That's it right there. I love the cover. And it's by Suspense Publishing. John and Shannon Robb did this with me, and they've been wonderful about it. The first book was called Skin in the Game, and I'm working on the third one now, which has a tentative title, but there's no point in talking about tentative titles. Kane and Harper are interesting characters. This story, as well as the one in Skin in the Game, I had really thought about for a number of years. A story that rattled around in my head, a concept, but I just didn't have the right characters, the right vehicle to write them. And so, the writers out there, you understand this. You get an idea, but it just doesn't fit what your ideas are at that time. But the story's cool, and so you hold on to it. And then these characters came along, and they were perfect for these two stories, because as opposed to the Jake Longley series, which is there's 4 of those books out, and the 5th one will be coming in the fall. They're more comedic, slapstick a little bit, a lot of serendipity, a lot of happenstance, and a lot of banter, and a lot of comedy in them. These books in the Kane Harper series are not comedic. They're down and dirty. They're more traditional thrillers. They're fast paced, and there's bad guys. Let's talk a little bit about Kane and Harper, who they are. Well, Bobby Kane and Harper Mccoy. Basically, they were raised as brother and sister, though they're not biologically related at all, by a gypsy family that roamed around the South. Now, they weren't Roma gypsies. They were what we would call in the South, and probably other places, called Irish travelers. I saw them when I was a kid growing up. Back then, they had horse-pulled buggies. Later, they moved on to motorhomes and SUVs and pickup trucks, but they still traveled around, and they went to places, and they would put on shows, and they would do day labor, whether if it was gardening or construction or whatever, anything to pay for the family. Oh, and they would also rob and steal and do a lot of criminal activity, and even tell fortunes and stuff like that. So Bobby Kane was abandoned in a bus station in Houston, Texas, at a few months old, and was scooped up by the family that saw him abandoned there and took him in. Around the same time, Harper, who was a year older, was basically purchased from her mother for a couple of $100 and a few bottles of whiskey. Her mother was half Cherokee, was an alcoholic, and basically sold Harper to the family. So Harper and Kane were basically raised, as I said, as brothers and sisters, and so they were raised in this family. And Harper was good at scamming people. She could give you those innocent eyes. She's darker complected. She's got dark hair. She's got dark eyes. But Harper has that magic that she can make people believe anything. She can lie straight to your face. This was part of her gypsy training. And by the way, she could pick your pocket while looking straight at you. She was great at creating scams for the family. She could scam people out of anything. Bobby, on the other hand, was more of a tomboy, climbing trees, doing stuff, and they trained him from about age 4 to work with knives. He got his first knife then, and he immediately had an affinity for it, and everybody saw that. Everybody saw that. And so he started throwing them. His Aunt Dixie, the family was about 60 people, and the kids that were in the family were assigned kind of to a family, a couple that would be their primary guardians, but basically the family raised them. And so it was Uncle Al and Aunt Dixie who basically raised Kane and Harper. So Aunt Dixie taught him how to throw the knife, and by age 7, he was a master at knife throwing. Harper would often hold the things that he would throw knives at and even get on the spinning wheel and all that. And he became known as Bobby Blade. And he became kind of the centerpiece of the shows that they put on because everybody wanted to see the boy wonder. And he was great. He was phenomenal with knives. Well, he was also trained in second story stuff, getting in and out of places. And he was kind of a tall, lanky kid. And he could disappear easily. He could hide. He could climb. He could do anything. He could get in and out of houses, even those that were occupied, and steal stuff. So he was trained very, very well in a lot of criminal activity and how to use knives. Flash forward at about age 12 for Bobby and 13 for Harper, the family got arrested by the FBI because they had, committed crimes across multiple states. And so everybody got split up, and Kane and Harper got separated, and they ended up going to separate families and didn't know what happened to each other. For 15 years, they didn't know what happened to each other. Bobby went into the military and the Army because of his skills and second story work and with knives and stuff. He went through multiple training with SEALs, with Rangers, with Delta Force, and all this because they saw his special skills. That's a good Freudian slip. And he basically ended up being an operative, black ops, where he would do targeted eliminations in the Middle East because he could go into these areas in Afghanistan, Iraq, whatever they were. They would fly him in. They would have Marine snipers. They would have maybe Delta Force or SEALs with him. But Bobby's job was to get into a building that was well guarded and get to the person they wanted, take care of them quietly, and disappear. And that was his skill. Harper ended up running a mission over there to take out a bomb maker in a house that was well guarded, and the mission morphed at the end, and Bobby was brought in at the last minute, and they met each other again after 15 years. Shortly after that, they left the military, and then they started their own business, if you will, where they fix things. And they're usually hired by people to do things that no one else will do. And that may require them tracking somebody down. It may require them rescue a hostage. It may require them to do wet work. And they are unabashed about doing any of it. In Prior Bad Acts, I'll read you just a little bit from it. They are hired by a physician from North Carolina whose son is working in a little town in Tennessee as what they call a locum tenens in an ER, and he ends up getting kidnapped. And it's very time sensitive, so Kane and Harper in the middle of the night head there. So the first scene is them at their house. They live in Nashville in a penthouse condo where they ply their trade from, as it were. But we're going to go with chapter 2. The first dozen chapters of this book jumps back and forth in time until the two timelines finally merge, and then the story moves forward in real time. And this is kind of the beginning of the scenario that draws their attention and draws them to this small town in the mountains of central Tennessee. It's chapter 2, 8 hours earlier. The gun appeared from nowhere, materializing at the end of an unsteady arm, the black hole of its muzzle searching for a target. Then the flash bang of sudden, remorseless violence, the shock momentarily locking the scene like a still life. Who keeps a gun stuffed between sofa cushions? For Dalton Southwell, the answer was simple. A punk-ass little shit is who. A punk-ass like Tommy Finley, jacked up on his own stash, wired to the point of implosion, leaving him no way to make a smart move. A desperate one, sure. It didn't save him. Didn't save his family. Not that anything could have. Their shared fate had been sealed the moment Dalton arrived in town. Everything had been so smooth, exactly as Dalton had set it up. He had choreographed every move that his brother Denny and Jesse Parker, a member of his crew, would make. His sources indicated that there would be 4 people inside. Tommy the punk, along with his father, mother, and sister. Dalton had hammered into their heads that they were to flank him so that they would have clean lines of fire if needed, and that they were to remain silent, leaving the talking to him. That's how it went down. He had total control, right up until he didn't. His knock on the door had been answered by the father, John, if Dalton remembered correctly. If not, so what? He didn't really give 2 shits. The curious look on the father's face as he swung open the front door and asked what Dalton wanted was quickly replaced by shock when Dalton's Glock pressed against his chest. Gathering the family in the den, Tommy, his sister, and his mother on the sofa, the father in a wingback chair at one end of a coffee table. Some stupid sitcom played on the big screen along the far wall. Dalton ended it with a single round spit from his silenced weapon. That got their undivided attention. Tommy flinching, his mother covering her mouth with one hand, only partially smothering her gasp. His father's face paled, his breathing quick and raspy, head swiveling, obviously seeking a way out, or a way to defend his family. The father asked again what the 3 men who leveled guns in his direction wanted. "You want to tell him who I am?" Dalton asked Tommy. Tommy's gaze danced quickly to his father and then back to Dalton, but he said nothing, as if his throat was clogged. Probably was. Dalton offered a half smile. "Then allow me to enlighten your family," Dalton said. "Bring them up to date on your recent activities." The mother and sister stared with big eyes as he dumped the bad news on them. That he and his crew were there to settle a score and to deliver a message. That dear old Tommy had tried to flex his own muscles, go out on his own. That was something that couldn't be allowed. Not from Tommy, not from anyone. "I don't understand," the father said. Dalton scratched his chin with his free hand. "You see, Tommy made a bad move. He tried to cut us out of his cells. He tried to hook up with another supplier and build his own crew." Dalton pointed the weapon at Tommy. He had been warned. He chose not to listen. "Are you talking about drugs?" the father asked. He glanced at his son. "Tommy isn't into that anymore. He went to rehab and put all that behind him." He now slid forward in his seat and stared at his son. Tell him you're clean." Dalton laughed. Clean, not Tommy. His large black pupils were only partly due to fear, the rest from the meth that swept through his bloodstream. Dalton's meth. "Tell him, Tommy," Dalton said. "Tell him what a good boy you've been." "Listen, Dalton," Tommy said, "I didn't screw you or anyone else. I was simply trying to expand my operation and make us all more money." The father now appeared in full panic mode, as if his worst nightmare had materialized, no longer regulated to the darkness of restless sleep, but rather standing right in front of him. Dalton loved this. That brief slice of time when a victim realized that their personal apocalypse had arrived, that Dalton was the personification of their every fear. Heady stuff. "Tommy, what are you talking about?" the father asked, his voice wavering. "It's not what it seems, Dad." Dalton laughed. "Actually, it's exactly as it seems." Tommy's fingers fidgeted at the edge of the sofa cushion. Then he wiped his hands on his jeans as he shook his head. "Dalton, I didn't go around you, I swear." "What about the guy over in Knoxville? The one who's cooking for you?" Tommy's left knee began to bounce, and his voice ticked to a higher pitch, the words coming quickly, as if saying a lot. was saying the right thing. I don't know what you're talking about. What guy? I don't know anyone over there. Dalton took a deep breath and puffed out his cheeks as he exhaled. Tommy, 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 don't you know me? Don't you know you can't bullshit me? Don't you know we work inside a very small community, that every time a new cooker pops up, we know the who, the where, the what, and most importantly, the how much before he cranks out his first batch? Listen to me, Tommy began. Dalton cut him off. Shut the fuck up. This isn't a negotiation. He now waved his weapon toward the two women. They recoiled, wide-eyed. And now you've dragged your family into this. What is it you want, the father asked. I told you, to deliver a message. The father nodded. We're listening. Dalton smiled. The message isn't for you. It's for anyone else who might be tempted to follow in old Tommy's footsteps. That's when the gun appeared. Tommy had shoved a hand between the cushions and came up with the .357. He managed to snap off a single round before Dalton punched a hollow point into his forehead. Then two into the father's chest, the man attempting to rise, his butt never clearing the chair's cushions before death arrived. The women released a chorus of screams, voices stretched to the snapping point, hands raised for protection. A pair of shots from Jesse's gun silenced them. The mother took it through the left eye, death following immediately, the daughter to the chest, now moaning and clutching at the red blossom blooming near her left breast. Dalton stepped forward and ended her struggles with a single shot to the forehead. He walked to where Tommy lay, crumpled on the sofa. The entry wound in his forehead was surprisingly clean, very little blood surrounding the black hole. Of course, the back of his head and his brain were splattered over the sofa and the lamp that stood behind. Dalton searched Tommy's pockets. He found a wad of money, which he took, and 2 phones, an iPhone and a burner. The former he left, but the burner he slid in his own pocket. Then Dalton saw his brother Denny. He was on his knees, clutching his belly, left side, blood flowing between his fingers. God damn it. This entire operation had just morphed from quick, easy, and smooth to screwed, blued, and tattooed. The truly infuriating part was that Dalton knew it was his fault. He should have foregone the speech and taken out Tommy straight up. But for him, the preamble was the payoff. His victim's rising fear with its coppery taste, the look in their eyes, the begging and bargaining. God, he loved that. Like waves of electric current enveloping his entire body. The killing was simply the exclamation point. And then it goes on from there. So I hope that's intriguing. I hope it raises some questions. Well, you know, my patients ask me all the time, you know, about my books and stuff, and a lot of them read them and then bring them in for me to be signed. And I think some of them are a little shocked that, you know, I can write this stuff and still be funny in the office. But I always tell them to read the Jake Longley books, and then they'll understand it a little better. But they enjoy it, you know, and I enjoy them enjoying it. And I think it adds another level of communication with the patients, and that's the single most important thing in medicine. I mean, besides knowing what you're doing, you got to be able to talk to people and have them trust you and believe that you know what you're talking about. And I always say, what I don't know, I make up. So there is that. And I'm glad you thought that was intense. It was intended to be intense. Obviously, the story goes on from there, and briefly in the beginning, obviously this guy's shot. They can't take him to the hospital. So what's the next best thing? You bring the hospital to him. So they find this doctor, Buck Buckner, who's doing the locum tenens, leaving the hospital, and they kidnap him and take him away, and they disappear into the hills. And when Kane and Harper arrive, they have to figure out where this doctor is, whose father has hired them. They have to try to rescue him. They have to find out what's going on. They have to deal with the bad guys, and the whole story unfolds. And it's all pretty much like that. It goes pretty quick. The scenes fly from one to the other. There's some really fun characters in there. There's a girl named Marla who's a drug addict who gets involved in this, and she's one of my favorite characters I've ever written. I like minor characters. I like them a lot. I like the secondary characters. I mean, obviously your protagonist and your antagonist are the heart and soul of the story, but I like all the characters that you build around them because you can really go places with them and you can have fun with them. And I think it's true in all my books. I love secondary characters. Any other questions? Anybody have anything they want to talk about? Like I said, what I don't know, I make up. So fire away. Yes, I am working on another, Chris. It's it's gonna be set in another imaginary town down in southern Tennessee, and it has to do with the murder of a college professor there. He's a young guy, and his mother happens to be the U.S. ambassador to NATO, and that's how Kane and Harper get involved to come there to find out who killed this guy and why. And of course, it's not as it seems. It's not a simple murder. There's much more to it and what's going on. So, because that's the way stories are told.
So we've got some questions here. I'll ask those of you.
Okay.
So the first one is from Chris. Says, "Let me thank you for the great work you do, both medically and as a writer. What is the effect on your practice being a writer of some pretty strong descriptive novels concerning death and violence?"
Well, that's what I talked about earlier. My patients actually like it and they find it funny, and they're a little chagrined by the violent ones, but they like it. And what's interesting is the older readers, especially the older women, really love this stuff. It's fun. And of course, practicing cardiology, a lot of my patients are older, and so yeah,
This
and they
stuff
talk
doesn't
about
stress them out at all?
Oh no, they love it. It's it's a story. It's not real. It's a story.
So what sort of research do you have to do for these books? We talked about how you lived in Orange County, and this one set in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Do you go visit? What do you do?
No, I grew up down there in Alabama, so and I've been to Nashville, and I've been places. It's interesting you'd ask that. I mean, when I wrote the two Royal Pains books, I had several people come up to me and say, "Wow, man, you really nailed the Hamptons. You must spend a lot of time there." I said, "I've never been there in my life." And I think that's an example of research. First of all, I watched the TV series, so I knew all the characters and I knew the milieu and I knew how it was. But also, if you go to the Google Earth and look at the geography of the area and look at the houses and look at the layout of things, that tells you a lot about how it is. And then go to the different cities and the sites and look at restaurants and bars and shops and stuff, and you can kind of get the flavor and the feel for the area. And then go to the real estate section and look at the houses and stuff there and look inside them, and you can see how a neighborhood is defined by its structures in many cases, the businesses, the homes and stuff, and you can tell a lot about a neighborhood. Everybody thinks the Hamptons is multi-gazillion dollar mansions and all that, but no, it's a little bit of everything, and some of it's very rural and very, very pastoral, if it were. So you have to research that way. I get asked that a lot about research because I write both nonfiction and fiction. In nonfiction, you have to do all the research, and you have to get all the data together, and then you have to organize the data, and then you use some of your fiction skills to write the thing to make it readable and fun for people, so it's palatable and they can understand. With fiction, it's almost the opposite. I do some basic stuff. I will spend a lot of time on Google Earth finding out, because I like to make up towns. I love to set my stories in small towns, because if you're in big towns, you got to deal with, if you're in LA or New York or Miami, you got to deal with LA, New York, and Miami, and they got to all be real. And that means the cops and everything. You don't want to defame them. You don't want to do this kind of stuff. And you need to do a lot of that research. And I find that actually tedious and boring. But if you can take a small town and create a police department and a medical system and shop owners and all the stuff you need to create a little town, that to me, that's fun. And again, I go back to minor characters. You get to create a lot of minor characters that way. So I'll spend a lot of time doing that, and I'll kind of get a feel for the story. Okay, this is the geographic layout that I kind of want, and this is the area I want it to be in, and these are the kinds of people that are going to live and work there. And then you do research along the way. When you come up on something, you say, well, does Rome, Georgia have a Starbucks? Because I'd put one in there, and I can't imagine because Starbucks on the moon. But I Googled, Starbucks in Rome, Georgia. Sure enough, there's 3 or 4 of them there. I didn't have to put it where any of them were. I just had to know it was there, because it's the little things like that that people will send you a letter and say, you idiot, you don't know what you're talking about.
Honestly, by the time you get the book to press, there very well could be a Starbucks where you put it.
Oh, sure. There probably will be. They're like the Borg. They're everywhere.
So Chris asked, where do you come up with your characters? Do you base any of them off people you know in real life?
Not really, but practice in medicine, you meet literally tens of thousands of people, and you meet them under stressful situations. So you get a feeling for how people are. And then growing up in the South, where everybody talks a lot and tells a lot of stories, you kind of know how people talk and dialogue and all of that. But I usually have an idea for a character when I'm starting a new series. I had an idea kind of who Kane and Harper were. I knew I wanted them raised by gypsy. That culture has always fascinated me from the time I was 6 or 7 years old and saw them for the first time back in Huntsville, Alabama. So this would have been the early 50s. And I remember they'd going down the street. I said, Dad, I said, who's that? What is that? It's a little wagon train, literally horse-drawn. And he said, oh, those are the gypsies. They're probably heading over to the fairgrounds. They'll put on some shows and stuff over there. Well, I said, wow, I've never heard of anything like that, And then later on, you see them around the South. And so that culture always fascinated me. And I knew I wanted them to come from that. And then I wanted them to have military skills. So I started putting it all together, and I had an idea. But the truth is, you don't know these people till you live with them. And so you start writing the story, and you get about 50,000 words into it. And by then they have morphed into the character you wanted. If you try to over-engineer them early, you end up tying your hands. And then you end up changing all of it anyway, because they're going to make you do what they want you to do as you get to know them. And I remember I met Elmore Leonard many years ago at the Maui Writers Conference, and we sat and talked for about 45 minutes twice. And he said something absolutely amazing to me. And I asked him, I said, Elmore, you have these great characters. They're all scumbags. They got no social redeeming value whatsoever, but we love them. They're wonderful characters. They're all down and dirty and all that, but we love them. They're wonderful. I said, do you do character sketches and stuff like that, so that you learn it? He said, nah. He said, I don't do anything like that. He said, it may take me a few weeks or even a couple of months to come up with a name. But once I got the name, I know the character. And it was like brilliant. I mean, Elmore is brilliant, was brilliant. What a great writer. I've learned so much from him. I've read all his stuff, some of it more than once. But that's two things. Number one, you have to live with these characters for a while. And that's what he was doing. He was doing a character outline in his head. And number two, the importance of names. Names are critical for characters. And you can't just pull just any old name out of the air, and other writers have had this experience. I'm sure. I'm writing a story and get into it and get 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, get the first draft done. And then I go back and start the rewrite, and I start reading, and who the hell is Martha? Now, Martha became Doreen about 30,000 words in, because Martha didn't fit the character anymore. And it's sad. Now you got to go search and replace. Okay, Martha's gone. It's Doreen now.
I mean, Kane and Harper are great names. Like, Kane is so evocative of a name.
Yep. And, the other thing is your protagonist for sure, and they need to have short names, because they need to slam the reader. They need to hit the reader in the face. They need to be something that's rememberable, that they can remember easily. And then you got to type it 1,000 times. So don't make it, Stravinsky,
Doing yourself a favor there.
Oh, how old was I when I started writing? Probably 50 years old. I was old. I I grew up in the South, so everybody there can tell a story. I mean, they won't feed you if you can't. They'll let you die behind the barn. But everybody down there can tell a story and spin a yarn. I could always spin a yarn. Hell, everybody I knew could spin a yarn. My friends, my cousins, my family, everybody could spin a yarn. And that's just part of the culture down there. Probably why so many great writers come from that area. But writing a story was different. And I always told myself that when I retired, I had these stories in my head. I will sit down and I'll start writing. But, 20, 25 years ago, I said, I ain't going to retire anytime soon. Hell, I haven't retired yet. I still go to the office a couple of days a week. I said, if not now, when? So I took a couple of classes at University of California, Irvine, which has a great writing program. And then I joined a couple of writing groups and just started writing. And then, it took a number of years I got some nonfiction done, which is pretty easy. But to get fiction where it was publishable took a few years. But that's the learning process, like everything else. It's the learning process. And you got to work at it.
What was the difference for you between the nonfiction and the fiction in terms of like getting it to where it's publishable?
Oh, the first book I wrote was a novel, and it was 138,000 words of the greatest literature ever written by a human being. I mean, this book was perfect in every respect. This was going to be only outsold by the Bible. I was absolutely certain of that. And so I sent it to Kimberly Cameron, who is my agent, the only agent I've ever had, and I love her to death. We had met at the San Diego State University Writers Conference a few years earlier, and we talked and liked each other and talked for a while. I said, someday we'll work together. And I told her I was working on something, and she said, well, when you get it done, send it to me. I want to see it. So about a year later, it only took like 2.5 years to write this 138,000 words of stuff. And I sent it to her, and she called me a week later, and she said, well, there's a story in here somewhere. I just can't find it. And I said, that's what I needed to hear. Thanks. She said, but there's some great stuff in here. If you clean it up, shorten it, tighten it, send it back. I mean, you never hear that from an agent. What I did is 120,000 words. Now she said, no, you're not ready yet. So anyway, and I sent her a couple other things, and she said, no, you're not ready yet. Keep working, keep working, keep working. So I'd written three novels. And then finally I came up with my first question and answer book, Murder and Mayhem. So I called her and I said, Kimberly, I got a book. You're going to love it, and we're not having trouble selling this book. And she laughed and she said, what's it about? I said, I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to send it to you. And she laughed. She said, send it. So I sent her the book, and she called me a few days later. She said, this is fabulous. I have no trouble selling this, because it was my first Q and answer book where writers would send me questions and I would answer them and explain the science and how to use it in the story. And they really are. I have 3 of them now. They really are unique. And she sold it to St. Martin's in 6 days. So then flash forward 10 years later, I called her because this first book I would not give up on because I love the story. So after 4 changes of location, 4 changes of title, change of protagonist, and the only thing that stayed the same was the bad guy in the basic story. It was down to like 85,000 words. And I called her. I said, Kimberly, you remember that book from 10 years ago? And she said, oh, God, yes. I said, well, it's ready now. And she said, really? She said, send it. She did. She called me a week later. She said, it's ready. And that became Stress Fracture, my first Dub Walker book. And then the other 2 books she rejected, I cleaned those up, and we published those later. So never give up. If it's a good story and you don't know how to tell it yet, just keep working on it. It'll happen. Put it aside, do something else, and come back to it. It takes time for these things to percolate, but never give up.
Yeah. A lot of authors talk about how like the writing process takes place mostly when you're not sitting at a computer,
right,
with pen in hand. And
yep.
I mean, 10 years is a really long commitment to that story, and obviously it paid off. Well,
I published 6 or 8 books in between. Fiction and nonfiction, but then I went back to that one and said, okay, this book is worthy. Don't give up on it, because I like the basic story.
So just to go back to some of the things you talked about earlier, do you come up with the story first, or do you build that character and then write the story around the character?
I think they kind of go hand in hand, character, story is character, but I think they both come at the same time. My Samantha Cody and Dub Walker series, I outlined. When I did the Royal Pains books, I didn't. I said, this is based on a TV series. They're not my characters. Let's just tell a yarn. And I just wrote it. And it was like, that was easy. It was so much easier because I didn't have to worry about the mechanics so much and keeping balls. And of course, they were lighter. They weren't police procedural and forensic science and all that stuff where you really have to keep a lot of things tight and in the area. So when I came up with the idea of Jake Longley, and I had a vague idea, I had one scene in mind. One scene in mind. That's it. And I didn't know where it was going to go. I didn't know who the bad guys were. I didn't know what the outcome was. I didn't really even know who Jake was yet. I just had kind of a vague idea about him and his father and his buddy Pancake. And that's about all I knew. And so I started writing this scene, and I finished that scene, and then I wrote the next scene, and then I wrote the next scene, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that was Deep Six. And I wrote that book in about 4 months. Bang, just flew. No outline. And I said, this is the way to do it. This is the way to do it.
So fly by the seat of your pants type of writer.
Absolutely. Now, saying that, you still outline in your head a little, and I use Scrivener, which is a great writing program. And so I'll have an idea as I'm writing, and I'll be 5 or 6 scenes into something, and I'll know what's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 scenes. And in Scrivener, you can go over and create those scenes and put a 2-sentence thing there just as a placeholder. And then you go on with your writing. And by the time you get there, okay, now this. But the story unfolds before your eyes as you write. And then you go back and rewrite. You must say that it's getting much easier. By the time I finish my first draft, which is usually in the 70,000 word range, and then you go back and add the things that need to be to make it clearer and move a few things around, and that really only takes me a couple of weeks to do that. And so the rewriting is very easy now. I hope after 20 books or so that it gets easier. But there's still always that panic right in the middle about this isn't working, you're a fraud, this is stupid, you've wasted the last 4 months writing this stupid thing, and
I would be worried if an author didn't have that sort of existential panic.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Oh, you have to. The only difference is on your first couple of books, it's real panic. By the time you get a dozen books under your belt, you get there and that panic starts swelling. You say, shut up, you idiot. You've been here before. It happens every time. Just go on, finish the story, and then you can go back and fix all this stuff.
Do you work on more than one story at a time, or are you writing and then editing a different one? And
No, I do them one at a time. But I go back and forth. I write 2 books a year. I write a Jake Longley book, and I write a Kane Harper book. That's kind of the way it's been the last couple of years. And I like that because they're 2 entirely different types of storytelling. So you don't get stale. And of course, while I'm working on one, I'm thinking about the other. And so I may make a few notes and stuff, but really not much. I just kind of keep it in my head and say, well, when you get there, remember this, if I do, it's important. And if I don't, it wasn't important. That's kind of my philosophy. I used to wake up at night and write stuff down. I realized that's a waste of time because it always sounds stupid in the morning. So if it survives till morning, it was something worth having. If it doesn't, it wasn't,
Is there something you do when you make that shift to the next series that helps you get into the mind frame of that character or of that world?
Not really. I just know that I'm entering a world where the writing is going to be a little different. The Kane Harper books, like I said, are more gritty, dark, true thrillers. And the bad guys are really bad, and bad things happen. And Kane and Harper are no nonsense. They will kill you in a heartbeat if it's necessary. Jake, on the other hand, is kind of like, why don't we go get breakfast, and then let's lay on the beach, and and maybe I'll take a nap, But then things happen and push his life out of balance, and he tries to get it back in balance. But he's more comedic, so it's just different style of writing, but it's really the same. It's really the same. You can only do what you can do.
Jake has much more my speed of lifestyle there.
Yeah. which of course his dad can't understand that at all, because Ray, his dad, is more like Kane. He's a warrior, you know,
Yeah.
ex-Marine and all that stuff.
So, two-part question.
Okay.
Have you ever thought about writing a movie, which maybe adapting one of yours to screenplay or helping write the original screenplay? And then do you think of like particular actors when you're writing these characters? Like, do you have someone particular in mind when you're writing Kane and Harper?
I mean, it has happened at least once. Jake, as I was into the second book on Jake, I said, Timothy Oliphant is Jake. He could be perfect. He was great Raylan Givens, and he's great in everything he does. I said he could be Jake. That's my vision. The character I created as Jake actually looks a lot and acts a lot like him, because he's kind of laid back in a lot of his roles and stuff like that. Have I written a movie? Actually, I did write the screenplay of my first book, the one that took 10 years to publish, and mainly it was an exercise. Just to write a screenplay. I think fiction writers should do that, even though I think way too much emphasis is put on structure. The 3-act, 4-act, 5-act, they change it every year, it seems like, in Hollywood. But at the end of the day, if you tell a story, it's going to have all those components. It's just by natural. It's just the way we are. It's in our DNA. Everything's in threes, from your DNA and how it codes for genes and how it codes for proteins. It's 3 DNA. Bases do that, and so it's in our thing that there's a 3-part structure, and every joke you've ever heard, has 3 parts to it. One's the setup, one's the twist, and the other's the climax, the hook on the thing. So it kind of comes out naturally that way. But that said, screenplays are a slave to structure. And I think it's good to know that stuff. And I think every fiction writer should take a screenwriting class or read a couple of books on it, so you kind of know what a story looks like visually, structurally. But don't get all wound up and try to force your story to fit that. It will do that automatically. It really will. It really will.
Did you find that you had to think more about dialogue, because dialogue really carries what's kind of being presented in the screenplay? Or were you able to keep the dialogue the same?
It had to be much more succinct, though. A lot of my dialogue is. My books are very heavy dialogue. Very heavy dialogue. All of them are. Even the thrillers. I find reading long passages of action and internalization and all that, I kind of zone out when I'm reading. Even if the book's exciting, it's kind of like, okay, I get it. Let's move on. So I try to keep those parts, I try to keep fight scenes and things like that and chase scenes to a minimum. Let the reader do that. They know what it's all about. You got to trust the reader. And plus, as I said, I find it boring. You can just put too much in there, and what I call stage directions. We get the picture. Give us the telling details, give us a sense of what's happening, and let us fill in the blanks. What you're really worried about and what your focus should be is, what's the impact of this that's going on? What's the answer? What's the solution? What's the twist? What's the next question? What's got to be done next? How's it affecting the characters? How are they reacting to this? What are they going to do? What are they going to say? What are they going to think? And I think that's more important than 3 paragraphs of action, of telling me what's going on. Let's just get it rolling and let it happen and get on with the story. But I'm very dialogue heavy in all of my writing, because I like that interaction. I like people talking to each other.
Chris asked if you're still working in television, and sort of related, does the television background tie into that dialogue heavy writing?
Yeah, and I'll clarify that a little bit, because all the television work I've done and all the shows I've worked in has only been with the writers. I mean, I have nothing to do with production. I've been on a couple of movie sets, boring, for 4 hours to get a minute of screen time. That's not the cloth I'm cut from. Let's get it done, get it on, move on to the next thing. Maybe it's cardiology practice that's that way. Fix it now because there's another problem around the corner. Don't dwell on it too much. But the writers I find very, very clever. I find screenwriters, because they do have to be so succinct, and time and space is critical, that their thought processes are very A, B, C, D, E, F. I mean, it moves. And I've learned a lot from that. I've learned a lot about storytelling from that. I always said, if you want to learn to tell a story, read Elmore Leonard. If you want to learn to write well, read James Lee Burke. You don't have to go any further than that. You will learn everything you need to know about telling a story from those two gentlemen. And they're master classes in it. And, like medicine, you learn medicine by an apprenticeship, basically. All of medical school, the first 2 years, of course, you got your nose in a book and you're absolutely exhausted when those 2 years are over with. But then they actually turn you loose on living people, when you're a junior. And so you're out there in the wards, and what are you doing? You're hanging around as a junior student with interns and residents and fellows and the medical staff. And you're hanging out with them and solving problems and fixing problems. And you're learning from people who know more than you. And you're learning techniques, and you're learning how things work, and you're learning what the real results are, not the textbook results, the real world results. And so it's an apprenticeship. Writing is too. You learn from people who are better than you. And that means you read. A writer must read. And once you start writing, you read differently than you ever did before. Because now you're not just reading a story because, hey, this is a fun story. You look at that sentence structure. You look at that paragraph structure. You're looking at the order of information. You're looking at how they put this yarn together, how they created this scene. And I would go back and sometimes read a scene from Elmore Leonard 2 or 3 times because of the way it was constructed, the cleanness of it. There's no fat. There's no BS. And with James Lee Burke, I'd read a paragraph and it would literally take my breath away. You just stop and say, oh, my God, that is such poetry. And you go read it again and you say, I know all those words. Why can't I do that?
Is there anything that you've read or been reading recently that you want to shout out and recommend to the listeners?
Yeah, I just read T. Jefferson Parker's latest book. I'm old and the name is escaping me. And Then She Was Gone or something like that. And then she left. It's fantastic. It's a part of his Roland Ford series, which that whole series is great. And then I read Eric Larson's book, The Splendid and the Vile, about Churchill during the Blitz. That was so enlightening. So enlightening. We think we know history. No. It's incredible.
The T. Jefferson Parker is Then She Vanished.
Yeah, Then She Vanished. Great story.
That came out a couple months ago.
Yeah.
I have The Splendid and the Vile in my audiobook queue, and I'm looking forward to reading it because I love hearing history narrated. That's my jam to listen to. I don't know why.
Yeah. Well, and what you'll walk away from that, and I think it's a lesson for everybody, is England was very close to falling. We'd look at history and look back there and think, England's England. They're all right. Sure, they got bombed a little bit, but they handled it, stiff upper lip and all that stuff. We will fight on the beaches. We will fight on the, well, they almost had to fight on the beaches and fight on the streets, and they almost completely collapsed. And you really get this feeling. You also get the feeling that you get the end of the day that Churchill was as nutty as a fruitcake, but he had huevos grande, and he could take a disaster and make people think they were winning. He had a gift that he was the right man at the right time in the right place in world history. And you'll walk away from that book with that, and you'll laugh out loud at some of it because he was insane, the things he would do.
I will have to bump that up in my to-be-read pile.
You'll like it. Yeah, I like all of Eric Larson stuff, though. It's he writes good stuff. The Devil in the White City, Dead Wake. I mean, he's written so many good books. Yeah,
that he has. I guess that leads us to our best question for you. What are you working on next?
Well, right now I'm working on, like I said, the next Kane Harper book. And right now it's called Scorekeeper, and we'll see. Like I said, it's the initial thing that they get called in on to help the murder of ambassador's son, who's a professor on a small college, is not what's going on. It's much darker than that. And they have to figure out where all the pieces fit and then fix it.
Do you feel like every book is getting darker and darker? And
no, not really. It's hard to get darker than Skin in the Game.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, this one's not as dark as Skin in the Game, but Prior Bad Acts, but it's got its moments too. But Skin in the Game was way down there.
So you've got the next one of these that you're working on.
Yeah.
Anything else coming out?
I have the next Jake book done. It's called The OC. Jake and Nicole and crew end up out here in Orange County, and a friend of Nicole's is a local TV reporter, and she picks up a stalker. And so Jake and Pancake and Ray and Nicole have to figure out who this person is, because they're doing it all electronically. You know, they're not showing up. They're not one of those stalkers that come and knock on your door or you know, harass you in a restaurant. They're doing it all electronically, and they have to figure out who this person is, where they are, why they're doing it, et cetera, and then track them down. And so it's called The OC, and it's already done. In fact, I got the new covers. We're deciding between two of them right now, just today, from Ocean View, but it'll be coming out next fall. So, and it's done in the can, edited, all that stuff. So now I'm moving on to the next Kane Harper book, and then to the next Jake book.
So we'll get a cover reveal soon on the next Jake book. Then, is what you're saying.
It should be very soon.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I love those.
Are there any OC landmarks that we can expect, being from Orange County area?
Oh, sure,
myself?
Sure. They have a couple scenes at the cannery.
Yes.
At Charlie's Chili, because Nicole loves their chili omelets. And the people who aren't from Orange County, these are iconic places in the Newport area. And the studio is right there around the 55 and the 17th Street area, right in there, where there's a lot of action right around there. You know, and so it moves around different areas of Orange County. There's even some scenes out on Ortega Highway, you know, probably the most dangerous road on earth. So anyway, it moves around Orange County. And of course, I live here. I do know that well, so I didn't have to do a lot of research. So,
yeah, Ortega Highway is sketchy. It was like the only way to get from Orange County to San Diego one day, because there were fires. This was like 2008 when there were those big fires, and I just said, no, I'm not going to drive over.
You had to go over to 15 and then go down. Yeah, it's the Ortega Highway goes up through these brush hills, and there's cars laying down on the bottom of these ravines. I mean, people go off there all the time, but you get these guys on these motorcycles, these Japanese motorcycles, and they'll do 120 miles an hour through there. They just fly through there, racing each other. And I'm going to tell you, if you're driving over 40 miles an hour, you're taking your life in your hands, because it is twisty, turny, no shoulders in a lot of areas. The two-lane blacktop, which two-lane blacktop is probably the most dangerous thing ever created, except maybe a shotgun. And it's yeah. So there's scenes there, and yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to that, and everyone should look forward to getting Prior Bad Acts today.
Yep, it just came out.
I have to say, thrillers have been such a great thing to get my mind off this year.
Yes.
Because like you said, it's just action, and get lost in what's happening.
Well, the beauty of the OC, I'd written maybe 6 chapters of it, you know, and for me, chapters are 1,500 words. I mean, I have short chapters so the reader can keep flying. And then we all got locked down, and our office was closed for a couple of weeks, and then we started seeing patients limited again for a couple of weeks, and then we opened back up. So I had about 4 or 5 weeks there that I was at home, so I finished the book.
Oh,
Took
wow.
me 6 weeks to write the whole book. Again, no
Wow.
outline, just flies. I knew the story. I knew where it was going. I mean, it just kind of went.
Well, that is very impressive and a nice little silver lining to the lockdown.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that brings us to about time, so I've got to wrap this up. But thank you so much to everyone who watched and asked questions.
Yes, thanks.
And thanks, Doug, for joining us.
And support your local bookstore. Whether if you buy
Yes.
my book or somebody else's, go to MG and get them. And like I said, they will have book plates signed. If you want them personalized, I will do that also. Just let them, just click it, buy it. I'll send the book plates to them, and it's all done. You can pick it up, or they'll send it to you, or whatever. And if you want to find out more about all my stuff, go to dplylemd.com. dplylemd.com, and you can get my podcast, blog, radio show, all that stuff's there.
Nice. And buy early if you are buying from indies.
Yeah. Yes.
Christmas is going to be crazy this year.
Yes, it is.
Well, all right. We'll say goodbye, and we'll see you very soon for the next Jake book.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks.